I never thought something like this could happen to my family. My daughter Emily was only 8 years old, and she was the light of our lives. She was full of laughter, full of joy, and her curious little mind was always asking questions about the world. My wife and I were proud of how brave she was, how independent. We thought nothing could hurt her, but I was wrong. It all started on a quiet evening. My wife and I had to go out for a couple of hours, so we left Emily home alone for the first time. She was excited about the idea, feeling grown up, and promised us she would be fine. I wasn't worried. Our house was safe, and we weren't going far. Emily was a brave little girl. We came home late, around midnight. The house was dark, quiet. At first, everything seemed normal, but as soon as I stepped inside, I felt something was wrong. A chill ran down my spine, and my heart started to race for no reason. I called out for Emily, but there was no answer. My wife and I rushed upstairs to her room, and that's when we saw her. Emily was lying on the floor next to her bed, completely still. I ran to her side, my hands trembling as I lifted her small body. Her skin was cold to the touch, and for a moment, I thought she was gone. My heart stopped. I shook her gently, calling her name over and over, while my wife, in shock, grabbed the phone to call an ambulance. After what felt like an eternity, Emily stirred. She opened her eyes, but something about her gaze felt off. Her eyes, usually so full of life, looked distant, empty even. She didn't say anything, just looked at me as if she didn't know who I was. Finally, she whispered, "Daddy," but her voice sounded weak, almost like it wasn't her own. We thought she had fainted, maybe from being scared, maybe from being alone for the first time. We took her to the hospital, but after several tests, the doctors said they couldn't find anything wrong with her. They assured us that she was physically fine, but I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it deep inside. The next few days were strange. Emily wasn't herself. She didn't laugh or play the way she used to. She was quiet, distant. She would sit in her room for hours, staring at the wall or out the window, her expression blank. Whenever I tried to talk to her, she would respond with short, empty answers, as if she was lost in her own world. Then the strange things began to happen. At first, it was small things. Lights flickering, doors creaking open by themselves. I brushed it off as coincidences. But then it got worse. At night, I would hear whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind or my mind playing tricks on me. But the whispers grew louder, clearer. They sounded like Emily's voice, but the words were strange, words she would never say. One night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up to check on Emily, thinking maybe she was walking in her sleep. When I opened her bedroom door, she was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. "Emily?" I whispered. She didn't respond. She didn't even blink. I walked closer, and then she spoke. But it wasn't her voice. The voice that came from her mouth was deep, cold, and it made my blood run cold. "Daddy," the voice said, "why are you afraid?" I froze. It wasn't Emily. It couldn't be. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest, and then she laughed. A low, eerie laugh that sent shivers down my spine. I ran out of the room, my mind racing, not knowing what to do. I told my wife about what happened, but she thought it was just a bad dream. She didn't believe me. But I knew what I heard. I knew something was wrong with Emily. The next few nights were terrifying. Emily would talk in her sleep, but it was never her voice. Sometimes I would hear her walking around the house late at night, but when I checked, she would be fast asleep in her bed. The whispers in the house grew louder, more frequent. I felt like I was losing my mind. Then, one night, everything changed. I was sitting in the living room when I heard Emily's voice again, calling me from her room. This time, it sounded like her. But something about it was wrong. Too sweet. Too calm. I walked to her room, my hands trembling. As I opened the door, I saw her standing in the middle of the room, facing the window. "Emily?" I called softly. She turned to face me, and I saw her eyes. They weren't her eyes anymore. They were black, hollow, like endless pits of darkness. "Daddy," she said in that same cold voice. "She's gone now. I'm here." Before I could react, Emily collapsed to the floor. I rushed to her side, but this time she didn't wake up. Her body was cold again, and no matter how much I shook her, how much I called her name, she didn't move. The next morning, Emily was gone. She died that night. The doctors said it was sudden, a condition they couldn't explain. But I knew the truth. Something had taken her from us. Something dark. Something evil. I never believed in curses, at least not until it was too late. My name is Jack, and my wife Sarah and I had always imagined a perfect life together. We were young and in love, and after 2 years of dating, we decided to get married. But there was one thing we never talked about with anyone. 2 months before our wedding, Sarah found out she was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but we were excited. It felt like the next chapter of our lives was unfolding earlier than we expected. We decided to keep the pregnancy a secret, thinking we'd announce it after the wedding. But our happiness didn't last. One night, as Sarah was about 8 weeks pregnant, she woke up screaming in pain. We rushed to the hospital, but there was nothing they could do. The doctor told us we had lost the baby. It felt like the world had crumbled beneath us. We had to pretend like nothing had happened, move on with the wedding as if everything was normal. That was when things started to change. Sarah seemed different after the miscarriage. She was quieter, more distant. But I thought it was just the grief. A few weeks after the wedding, she began having strange dreams. Every night she would wake up in a cold sweat, telling me about a woman standing at the foot of our bed, whispering. Sarah could never hear what she was saying, but the woman's face was pale and gaunt, and her eyes were hollow. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a nightmare, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The dreams didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. Sarah said the woman would get closer to her every night, her whispers growing louder, her face more twisted. One night, I woke to find Sarah standing in the middle of our bedroom, staring at the wall, muttering to herself. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. When I touched her shoulder, she snapped out of it, but she looked at me with eyes I barely recognized. Cold, distant, as if something else was looking through her. Things in the house started to feel wrong. It was small at first, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night. But soon, we began hearing the crying. It would start just after midnight, faint at first, like a baby's wail coming from far away. It would grow louder, echoing through the house. But when we searched every room, there was nothing there. Sarah started getting sick. She was pale, always exhausted, and no matter what we did, she couldn't seem to shake the feeling of being watched. Then, one night, she woke me up in a panic, clutching her stomach. "She's here," she whispered, her voice shaking. I looked around the room, but it was empty. "Who's here?" I asked, trying to calm her down. "The woman," she said. "She's here for the baby." The next morning, we found a note written in Sarah's handwriting, but she swore she hadn't written it. The message was short, but it sent chills down my spine. The child must be born. We tried to leave the house, but it was as if something wouldn't let us. The more we packed our things, the heavier the air around us became. It felt like the house itself was alive, watching, waiting for something. One night, the crying returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. Sarah's health continued to decline, and I was losing her, little by little, to whatever was haunting us. The crying wouldn't stop. It filled the walls, vibrating through the floor, and I felt like I was going mad. Then, as Sarah lay in bed, too weak to move, I saw her. The woman from Sarah's dreams, standing at the foot of the bed, her hollow eyes fixed on Sarah's stomach. She smiled, a twisted, malevolent smile that chilled me to my core. "Jack," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She wants the baby back. In that moment, everything became clear. The baby we had lost. It wasn't just gone. It had been taken. The woman, whoever she was, had laid a curse on us. A curse tied to the unborn child we never had the chance to hold. I tried to fight it, but there was nothing I could do. The woman's voice filled the room, a low, guttural chant that shook the very foundations of the house. Sarah screamed as her body convulsed, her hands clutching her stomach in agony. Then, everything went silent. When I looked down, Sarah's breathing had stopped, her eyes wide open, staring into nothingness. The room grew cold, and in the corner, I saw it. A small, shadowy figure. It didn't make a sound, but I knew it was the child we had lost. It stood there, watching, before disappearing into the darkness. The house remains empty now, abandoned. No one will ever understand what happened here, and I can't bring myself to tell anyone. All I know is that the curse is real, and it took everything from me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the crying.
I always thought my son, Jake, was just like any other 11-year-old boy. He was kind, curious, and loved spending time with his friends. But one day, something changed. It started on a normal Tuesday. Jake came home from school, but he wasn't his usual cheerful self. He was quiet, almost too quiet. His backpack seemed heavier than usual, and his clothes were dirty, as if he had been playing in the mud. I asked him what happened at school, but he just shrugged and said, "Nothing, Mom." At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he had a bad day. Kids his age sometimes just don't feel like talking. But over the next few days, I noticed other strange things. He stopped talking about his friends, and when I asked about them, he would avoid eye contact. His once bright smile was now rare. He spent more time alone in his room, and when I asked him what he was doing, he would quickly hide something under his bed. Then, one evening, I was cleaning his room when I found something that didn't belong to him. It was a small toy car, but I knew it wasn't Jake's. I had never seen it before. It was old, scratched, and dirty. I thought maybe he had traded it with a friend, but when I asked him, his reaction was strange. His face turned pale, and he quickly grabbed the car from my hand. "It's mine!" he shouted, his voice trembling. I had never seen him act like this before. "Jake, calm down," I said softly, trying to ease his panic. "If it's yours, then okay, but where did you get it?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me with wide eyes, gripping the toy tightly in his hand. I decided to let it go for the moment, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next day, he came home with another strange item, this time a necklace. I knew for sure it wasn't his. I had seen that necklace before. It belonged to one of his classmates, a girl named Sarah. I had met her mother a few times at school events. "Jake, why do you have this necklace?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I found it," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Jake, this isn't yours. It belongs to Sarah. You need to give it back." He didn't respond. He just walked to his room and shut the door. I stood there, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. What was happening to my son? As the days passed, more strange things began to happen. I would hear Jake talking to someone in his room, but when I opened the door, he was always alone. He stopped sleeping well, waking up in the middle of the night, screaming from nightmares he couldn't explain. And every time I asked him what was wrong, he would just say, "I'm fine, Mom." But his eyes told a different story. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I stayed up late, listening outside his room. Around midnight, I heard him whispering again. But this time, the voice I heard wasn't his. It was deep, too deep for a child. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly opened the door. Jake was sitting on his bed, his back to me, whispering in a language I didn't recognize. I called his name softly, but he didn't turn around. I stepped closer, and that's when he finally looked at me. his eyes. They weren't his. They were dark, almost black, and filled with something I can only describe as evil. "Jake," I whispered, my voice shaking. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was cold, twisted. "He's not here," he said in that strange, deep voice. I froze, unable to move or speak. This wasn't my son. Something was inside him, something dark. Over the next few days, I tried to find help. I went to the school, spoke to his teachers, and even called a doctor. But no one believed me. They said Jake was just going through a phase, that he would grow out of it. But I knew better. The thing inside my son was growing stronger. I could feel its presence in our house, watching, waiting. Then, one night, it happened. I was asleep when I heard a loud crash from Jake's room. I rushed in and found him standing in the middle of the room, his eyes black as coal, holding a mirror that had fallen off the wall. His reflection in the mirror wasn't his own. It was something else, something terrifying. "Mom," he said, his voice cold and empty. "I'm not alone anymore." I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let whatever this was take my son away from me. I spent the next few days researching, trying to find a way to free Jake from this evil. I learned that sometimes spirits or dark entities can attach themselves to children, using them as a vessel to return to the world of the living. I don't know how this thing found Jake, but I knew I had to fight it. I won't stop until I get my son back, even if it means facing the darkest of forces. Jake, my sweet boy, wherever you are, I will find you.